Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming. It took a little bit, but I have finally beaten Persona 3 Reload, right in time for episode I guess. And yeah, we gotta talk about this, because, one, I love Persona if I haven't made that abundantly obvious with this channel. And the more I think about Persona 3, the fonder I am about it on the whole. I think Reload is a stellar game. Let's rip the band-aid off, it's incredible. But to properly understand why I'm not only falling in love with P3, but my thoughts about P3 on the whole have been rapidly improving over these last couple of weeks as I got back into Reload. We have to understand my history with P3, or Persona on the whole. I started with 5. Well, technically, I started by listening to Total Biscuit's thoughts about playing through Persona 4 Golden, a game he loved. I became very interested, and I got in with Persona 5. I fell in love with that game. I wanted to desperately play P4, but I didn't have a Vita, so I was SOL until it would eventually get a port, which I still kind of feel as if I borderline manifested into existence. I fell in love with Persona 5 Royal, though. Then Golden came out, I think that was the timeline, and I fell in love with that game as well. And P3 was the odd duck out for me of the 3, 4, and 5 trilogy for Persona. I had watched, like, YouTube playthroughs of Fez, or mainly highlighted playthroughs of Fez. I knew what the story was, I knew of the characters, but I didn't have that personal connection to 3 because I hadn't played it. And then Portable got ported, and I played that, and this is going to be a theme throughout this video of me going over my thoughts, and basically my review of Persona 3 Reload. I think Portable did a really bad job resonating that story and those characters with me, because it embraced the identity of being a visual novel, and I think a lot of the emotional impact that 3 has, at least for me, comes through facial expressions and through the animated cutscenes and just the little mannerisms of the characters. So I had experienced the story of P3, but I wasn't entirely enraptured by it. You combine that with some pacing issues that I had with P3 in the first half being really dang slow until Igas got introduced, on top of social links being kinda hit or miss for me in 3, and yeah, then Reload. God, does it do everything better. Like, yeah, I wish it had a FemC route for people who wanted that, but I personally would play as Makoto personally, so it doesn't really affect me. What Reload does so well is that it not only strengthens the strengths that P3 originally had, it smooths out a lot of the rough edges that P3 also had. It doesn't completely rectify them, but it makes those down moments for me far more palatable and enjoyable. Even lackluster social links like Nozomi in Reload, in my opinion, were rather enjoyable because they just said screw it. One, the voice acting goes insane in this game. It's so good. The fact Nozomi just hit a moonwalk made me care so much more about that character because they were willing to just have fun with it. Having new voice acting for the main crew of a beloved Persona game that had been out for over a decade at this point is a tall task, right? People had been associating these characters with those voices for the longest time. I didn't have all that much investment with the older VO cast, and I thought the voice direction in original P3 was a bit spotty. It's S tier in my opinion when it comes to Reload. I like every voice. There's not a single bad performance in Reload for me. So let's go through the story first, and let's talk about the characters, because I think they are one of the biggest strengths of P3, and I think it's because of two major reasons. The development that each of these characters receives by themselves, but also the non-Makoto-oriented conversations that these characters have. The theme of Persona 3 is all about death. Understanding death, accepting it, coming to terms with it, and choosing to live your life to the fullest before death eventually embraces you. The death in P3 can vary depending upon the character. For some characters, it's the death of a dream. For others, it's the death of the body. And for others, it's coping with death of someone else, or how death can impact other relationships. And this is one of the elements that I think makes P3 so special, because it does an excellent job of integrating that theme and tackling it from various different angles and with unique perspectives for each of the characters. P3 on the whole is a well-rounded breakdown and analysis of how death impacts the human experience, and it analyzes this in so many different ways, and I think it largely does a stellar job at this. Each of the main party members from Cs receives so much development throughout the game, and this was true of original P3 as well. But what Reload does is it adds on to these scenes. Not necessarily adds on, but adds additional scenes. And any one of these individual additional scenes they add in P3 Reload aren't the most game-breaking things by themselves, but what they do, right, is when you take them in consideration with all the other scenes from both the base game, but also the new Reload scenes, they add just enough characterization, just enough fleshing out of these characters and how they interact with one another, that it goes in an exceptionally long way for me. It was exactly what I was personally missing from P3 up to now, because I understand how all these characters act by themselves. They all feel like characters that can stand on their own 2 feet, but I also know how these characters stand with one another, how they interact with one another, and how the group of Cs interacts with each other on the whole. They're filled with different personalities, and they're bright, bubbly overall, and they're great. It's a cast of characters that really fleshes one another out, and you feel how different they are as characters from the beginning of the game to the end. P3 does an exceptional job of this, because they also don't necessarily rely on only the MC to come about these changes. In fact, I would argue most of the reason I like Junpei so much as a character is not even to do with Makoto at all, it's just the story between him and Chidori, which is handled so well in Reload. And I didn't get, by the way, full spoilers for P3 throughout this video, in case I didn't make that abundantly clear, I didn't get the scene where Chidori comes back from the dead in Portable, because I missed out on talking to Junpei once. I think it's handled way better in Reload. One, it's far less missable, but also, it's the way that it's told. And it was kind of at that moment where Junpei reunites with Chidori, where I'm like, I have to reevaluate my rankings for Persona games. Because it seems like that, because it's not the only one, but it seems like that make P3 and its cast so special to me. The game has some extreme highs and has extreme lows in terms of these characters' mental state, not in terms of enjoyability, but I'm saying you see these characters at their worst and you see them at their best. And you see them throughout the middle part of that as well. It's never just one or the other. And I think having all of these scenes without Makoto necessarily intervening, and you let these characters simply communicate with each other and work through some rather tough issues like Yukari and Mitsuru did with one another without the MC, it makes these characters feel more personable and be able to stand on their own 2 feet. I'm not trying to throw shade at other Persona games, I'm just saying I think this is an element of P3 storytelling that works especially well because of how P3 specifically went about handling this. You combine all these character moments with the overall plot being as dark and depressing as it is because it's all concerning death, but maximizing your enjoyability of life before death, and with the brilliant cutscenes this game has, the well-written dialogue, the well-voiced dialogue, and when the plot really starts to get rolling after Aigis is introduced, it doesn't stop, and it flows from one full moon cycle into the next seamlessly, and it feels good. It has great pacing in that regard. I still have a bit of an issue with the early game pacing of P3, however, in a lot of ways they take their time, especially in Reload, to flesh out the cast of characters and their dynamics with one another, and to have fun scenes with them. So when you get to those darker elements later on, I'm more inclined to care about them because P3 puts in such a stellar job at doing this, because they put in so much time and effort to make me already care about these characters. I'm not saying this is unique to Reload in comparison to all of 3, it's just, I had only seen snippets from Fez, and I had played Portable, and I don't think Portable did a really good job of conveying all this stuff, at least for me. So being able to experience it with all the cutscenes and the proper pacing of Reload, with the additional scenes, it makes everything hit far harder for me. And I think the best representation of this is, funnily enough, one, that Chidori scene, but also the intro scene, which hits so much harder in Fez and Reload than it did in Portable. Because when you I was going to segue about the finale, but I need to talk about this element with the cutscenes. And it's what makes the cutscenes in 3 so special, and why I think Portable didn't land for me as much as 4 and 5 P5 did, because it took the visual novel approach. But with the cutscenes in Reload and Fez, but mainly Reload here, when you have a game with this dark theme, the pacing of these cutscenes and the pacing of the way they convey this story is so important, because you have to develop tension, you have to know how to play with the player's emotions and their expectations. And when you devolve every cutscene to just a visual novel of PNGs like bouncing up and down on your screen, it doesn't do a good job of conveying that. But with the cutscenes in Reload especially, good God, it's such an incredible experience. Like, the introductory cutscene to P3, in my opinion, is one of the best introductory cutscenes of any game ever. It builds up so much tension, it has brilliant pacing with Yukari trying to come to grips and accept the Avoca and, like, how scary that proposition can be. Because we know it's in Avoca, but you're still, like, shooting. You can feel the tension there. Feel the tension of the Dark Hour. Makoto not caring at the beginning, and over the course of the game, you can even kind of feel him starting to care way more and more about everyone and the things going on. And then you have the finale, which in my opinion is one of the most well-written endings in video game history. I've never been that sold on the answer because of various reasons, but when it comes to the base game's ending, I said it on stream. Persona 3 is the story of a guy who cares the least, willing to give everything for those who care the most. And 3 does such a damn good job of implementing its theme throughout its gameplay as well. The whole idea of Tartarus. Like, we'll talk about Tartarus later on, but just, it's a representation of death. You are making most of the floors you navigate through, moving on to the next, but you never know when the end is. And when the end comes, it's abrupt. And it just ends. No more Tartarus, no more life to live. Just a resultant of all the work you had put in up to that point on the previous floors. It's poetic in a lot of ways. And they handled the ending brilliantly. That final choice, the ... or close your eyes, alongside the music. It's great. Like, maybe a slight nitpick I would have is I wish that we had to click close your eyes a few extra times, and we saw him, like, close his eyes progressively until they were finally shut, but, like, that's a nitpick more than anything. You have the entire story of Igus, a robot who didn't even view herself to be alive to begin with, and over the course of the game, she becomes more and more human until she finally accepts that she can live. She has a soul, she can live on. And it's funny how she comes to this realization as Makoto bids his farewell. As one life ends, another begins, essentially. There's a lot of subtle poetry when it comes to the theme of death throughout Persona 3. And I think the game does an excellent job of implementing it throughout various features. Even when it comes to the UI, I think the UI is solidly okay on the whole. The element that I love the most, though, is Makoto falling into the ocean. This essential abyssal ocean, where there's light at the top, and it gets darker the further down. And then for episode, I guess we see her diving in trying to find Makoto, and yeah, it's a bit tragic. And maybe this is recency bias for me, and I do kind of need to sit on it a bit longer, but the biggest takeaway that I'm having when it comes to P3 Reload is that I think Persona 3 might be my new favorite Persona experience-ish. I think it's the most consistent story, at least that I've experienced in Persona. And I think it does the best job of incorporating its theme throughout its gameplay and story and characters, with a close second being P4 Golden. I've been saying this throughout my playthrough of Reload. Chances are your favorite Persona will be the game where the theme resonates the most with you, or the game you played the first. For me, I played P5 for the first time as my first Persona game. I love 5, I adore 5, especially Royal. I think it has my highest highs in the franchise, but I think I prefer 3 more consistently throughout. And then for 4, I just love the characters and the vibe of that game so much. And the overall theme of P4 is really good, about accepting yourself and all that. But when it comes to Reload, I don't think it's a perfect game, but it's a game where when it does the things it does well, it overshadows any issues that I have with it. Speaking of, let's get into them a bit with the gameplay. We already talked about the pacing for the story in the first half, being a bit slow for my interest, but then kind of like rectifying that in Reload by adding a few additional scenes and stuff like that with the characters to make you care more about the cast, and I think that works mostly. Doesn't completely fix the issue, but far bolsters the experience. When it comes to the gameplay, Elizabeth request, I hated these things back in Portable, they're solidly okay here in Reload because they're not nearly as grindy, which I definitely appreciate. I don't have to bother myself with like grinding the same enemies over and over and over again, hoping a weapon drop will happen. Chances are it just comes from a chest at the end of that Tartarus section. Way better decision in my opinion. Let's talk about Tartarus. I don't like it, but I like it far more in Reload than I did in Portable. They don't fix the issue of it being a bit too much of a slog for me, and for feeling too repetitive. But they at least try to rectify that a little bit. I like the floors that can change up the experience, like some floors are just completely shrouded in night or darkness, and you can find a bunch of Twilight fragments in these floors. Those are always a nice find. Exploring certain blocks of Tartarus can be really goddamn annoying, especially if you're trying to full clear every floor like I did, because they don't make it easy to check every corner. I would have been way more annoyed by those giant thieving hand guys, where it's essentially an RNG check. You have to like guess 3 times in a row which direction they go. But they did a clever thing where Fuka gets the ability to just search a Tartarus floor, so she's like, yeah, if you just use my ability on this floor, I can just like navigate you to it. It's nothing much, right? But it's a nice little touch, just to vary up the experience, and if you want, essentially skip a floor. The whole idea of Tartarus is that it's supposed to be a gameplay metaphor, not Refantasio, for the theme of death, and that it just keeps going and going and going, but like death, you never know when the end is the end. So you just keep going, you just keep progressing, and I think the biggest issue with Tartarus is that it was designed for an original P3 and a Fez world, not for a Portable and Reload world. And without the tide mechanic that kind of incentivizes you to take Tartarus piecemeal, at least for a time, to where you're supposed to tackle Tartarus bit by bit instead of all in one like night or evening, it spreads it out and makes Tartarus go from this giant slog to more bite-sized sections, to where you kind of put like your fork in the pile, throw it in the fridge, and you'll tackle it again tomorrow. And if you really want, it can also incentivize you to keep all your party members up to level as you cycle through them all, so you can have longer and longer Tartarus sessions. It always felt like Tartarus was designed for this playstyle, but when they removed or minimalized the tide mechanic, especially in Reload, and with the missing people, you're heavily incentivized just to wait for the final night of the full moon section and then do Tartarus all in one fell swoop. Like, you don't need to do this, but you feel heavily incentivized to do it. So it makes each of these sections where you're tackling Tartarus feel very long and slog-like. And despite them trying to shift things up a bit, I don't think it completely rectifies my issues with Tartarus. But the other issue is that because you can tackle Tartarus like this, and you're incentivized to do so because of the missing people, and you also need to level up your social stats and do the 2 social links at night, because you're not devoting so much time in the evenings to Tartarus, by the end of the game, you just kind of run out of things to do, like I did. I had no social stats left to grind, and I had no social links to do at night. So when I didn't need to go to Tartarus, I'm just like trying desperately to find something to do. And they try and like smooth this out a bit with being able to take Koromaru out for walks, or reading books with various members of C's, or cooking with various members of C's, or watching DVDs with various members of C's. But it's like not enough. So there was like a month and a half there at the end of the game that I just didn't really have much to do, and just kind of ended up taking Koromaru for walks. Maybe I could get a funny scene or something out of him, but it didn't feel all that good in my opinion. I think nighttime needed a few more activities. I think another thing they really wanted you to do at night was something I didn't discover till kind of late in the game, and that was, you know how when you visit the shrine during the day, you can gain reputation with various social links so that you can just progress to the next rank the next time you talk to them. You don't have to have like this, like, I don't think it'll rank up this time, I can still hang out with them. You don't have to do that. You can kind of do that at night as well. Not even kind of, you strictly can, with like this one program you can repeatedly buy for the shared computer. When I eventually play Reload again, I'm gonna make way more use of this earlier on. But like, yeah, that exists and it's nice and all. I still think the nighttime needed a couple more activities to do. But now, one of my favorite elements of P3 Reload, the combat. I love this thing. Oh my, the combat in this game is weirdly good. And in a lot of ways, it's what Royal does, but in a way that's far more palatable for me. The problem I had with Royal, right, is that all the additional mechanics that game had and expanded on made the game a bit too easy. You can make baton passes absolutely outrageous, and showtimes were essentially just a block of damage. I think Theurges is at least one of the best ideas they've ever had. And I hear that one of the earlier Persona games had this mechanic as well, but the way it's implemented in Reload is brilliant in my opinion, because it breeds individuality into the kits of these characters, to where it's not just like, oh, Junpei's the guy that uses physical attacks and has fire damage, cool. No, it's also, yeah, but the way you generate his theurgy gauge is by hitting criticals. Oh, Mitsuru has this, like, dominant personality, so when she applies status effects to others, she gains theurgy gauge. By the by, nice little synergy with Junpei there. Yukari is your healer, so she gains theurgy gauge by healing everyone else. They not only have theurgies with various effects that all look great to look at. The animations there are stellar. But the way you build up these gauges and the effects of these theurgies are unique to these characters. And I think that goes a long way. It makes all of the characters in Reload feel and play differently to one another. I love the theurgy mechanic. I think one mores in this game were rather simple. They're called shifts here. But they don't just like break the game like they did back in Royal. I think Twilight Fragments as a system, compared to Portable where you could just heal up with currency, I think Twilight Fragments was an interesting resource. I liked it. It also made me more mindful of my SP because I would have to use items or use a significant chunk of Twilight Fragments, which I wanted to hoard and save, to open chests. My one big glaring issue when it came to Reload is an issue I have with a lot of RPGs, especially turn-based ones, and that is XP share. This game uses the clock that you can find throughout Tartarus, to where the next time you play with a certain character, they can just pretty much be bumped all the way up to the level you're appropriate at. But personally, I just found it more limiting than anything, and I do kind of miss having Mishima from P5, where all my party members are pretty much equally leveled to one another. I can swap in and out and play with the whole squad instead of having to like pick and choose my main team. If I wanted to, I could swap out various characters, which I did periodically, but I liked having the freedom to be able to do it whenever and however I wanted to. That's just a personal thing, doesn't really compromise the game for me or anything like that. I just really like having XP share so I don't have to grind with everyone individually. Or in this game, I guess find the great clock enough times in a row. And then we also have the music in this game. It's awesome. Not a bad song in this entire game. Lotus Juice pops off as is usual. I love every song in this game. It's great. I'm not someone who can really go into music theory or anything like that. It's just the music sounds great. It's upbeat and happy-go-lucky and positive and a vibe what it needs to be, and slow, dark, and depressing what it needs to be because it's Persona 3. And I think one of my biggest takeaways with Persona 3, walking away from it and going into episode Aegis, is that the more I think about it, a lot of my favorite elements of Persona come from 3. My favorite characters are Elizabeth and Aegis. My favorite ending is either Royal or 3, and I'd probably give the edge to 3 there. My favorite social link is Akinari. My favorite combat in the series is in Reload. My favorite Velvet Room attendant, Elizabeth. Duh. P3 has some of my favorite music in the series as well, alongside Royal. I just love Persona music in general, but especially Reloads. And while 3 has some of my lowest lows in the series, they're overshadowed by the highs and how many things I love and cherish from 3, and especially Reload. It's a fantastic game. And honestly, at this point, I just want to play more Persona. I finished 3 Reload on stream, and like an hour after I ended stream, I'm like, I really want to play P4 now. Because, one, I need something happy-go-lucky, at least, for a little bit, after that ending. But also, I just want to play more Persona. And hey, we got episode Aegis coming out, and then also Metaphor Refantasio. We're eating good. So, I'm gonna call the video there for the day. I think we've closed our eyes enough. Stay safe, have a great day, leave a comment down below with your favorite Persona, and your thoughts on Reload on the whole. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again!